Hi, I'm Lee Hao. So today I'm going to share with you how you can use Svelte Actions to reuse event listeners. To do so, I'm going to share with you 3 examples, right? So let's take a look at the first example. So over here, I have an example and a result, which you will see the example will be on the left side of the REPL and the results will be on the right, right? So what we're going to do here is that we're going to have 3 examples on how, using event listeners, and we're going to rewrite it to use actions to replace them, and that will be on the right, right? So so that we can compare side by side, like to make sure that the effect still looks the same, but it's rewritten using actions, right? And you can then decide on your own whether you prefer to write it with actions or continue to use your event listeners, right? No judgment over here. I'm just going to show you how you can do it. So the first example over here, let's take a look at the first example. So the first example is called a blur on escape, right? Which means that if I'm going to type over here, type something, and when I click on the escape key, the input itself will be blur, right? Which is it loses the focus and you can, like you don't see the blue outline of that input anymore and the cursor is no longer in there. It's losing focus. So how we can achieve this is that there's multiple ways of doing it, right? So one way I'm doing it over here is that I'm having an input and I bind the inputs to a variable. So so this input variable will reference to this input element. And then I have a key down, which on key down will listen to key down. And in the event handler over here, I will check if the key is escape, then I will blur the input, right? So far, so good. So one of the things that I've mentioned earlier, if you haven't seen this video about why, what's so good about Svelte Actions, you can click over here, the links over here. Is that one of the things that you can do is that you can reuse, it makes you easier to reuse actions on the same elements, on multiple elements. So in this case, if I want to have multiple inputs and I want to blur like multiple inputs, then probably I would have to make it like input 2, input 3, and probably over like blur escape 2 and 3, which would have to blur a different input, right? Probably I would have to do that instead to achieve this effect. Then as you can see over here, then there will be duplication of code over here. I would have to create input 1, input 2, and input 3, right? So that I can escape from the first input, from second input, and from the third input. Right, so, do I have to do this? Well, if you're smart enough, you might notice something. Well, you don't have to declare a variable called input in order to blur each of them. Well, you can get like event.current target, right? And then you can just remove all this and you can reuse the same events listener, do away with this, bind this. You can still achieve the same effect. Escape, and escape, right? You can still achieve that. Do you need action? Do you need it? Well, yeah. I'm not here to pass judgment on whether you should use or not, but I'm here to show you how you can rewrite this to use actions, and then you can reuse that action on multiple places where you don't have to import. So instead of importing this event list handler or writing it multiple times, now you are importing that actions and reuse it multiple times, right? So over here, I'm gonna create a result 1.svelte. I'm gonna copy this over, and I'm gonna import from result 1 instead, right? So over here on the right is the result. So I'm gonna change this to use actions instead of event handler, right? So over here, I'm gonna say function. So An action is a function. So I'm gonna say I'm gonna call it blur on escape function, blur action. And this function, an action function, takes in a node and param. Right? In this case, we don't really need a parameter, so we just leave it like this. Right? And then what we can do next is that it should return an object which could be called when you are updating the parameter or you are destroying that element, right? So right here we have, if we are using actions instead, so I'm gonna just use action now. Use this. Copy paste over multiple times. So if you use an action instead of event listener, then you will have to add event listeners yourself, right? Which means that I will probably have to say node.add event listener key down, and then I'm gonna have the same event over here. So I'm gonna copy this over and have it here instead. All right, so blur on escape, I'm gonna pass it over here, and I'm gonna return a destroy. I'm gonna remove event listener instead. All right, so this is the same way. This will achieve the same effect of using an event listener instead. Right, so let's see whether it still works. I'll click escape, type, escape, type, escape. Right, so yeah, so over here, example, if you're using an event handler, now you're using an action instead, and you have to register and unlisten the event listener. Right, so let's move on to see example 2. Right, so I'm gonna change this to example 2, and let's see what we have for example 2. So the second example over here is that we have same thing goes. We bind inputs to the tree inputs element, and on key downs, I'm gonna call next on enter, meaning when I type something, when I click on the enter key, it should go to the next inputs. I click on the next inputs. Right, so how it works is that I bind this tree variable input 1, 2, 3, and then on each of the event handler, when I click enter, I'm gonna focus on the next inputs. Right, so over here I have to do this multiple times. Is there a way that we can, instead of so in the previous example, we see that if we don't have to create multiple event handler when we can somehow access like the current target of the event, so that we don't have to reference any elements that we assign outside of this event handler, then we can reuse this event handler, right? So in this case, we are referencing input 2, input 3 in this event handler, and input 3 on the this event handler, right? So the second one is to focus, and the third one is that when I click enter, because there's no next event input, then I'll have to blur myself, right? So is there a way that you can somehow pass this inputs as an parameter of this event handler or something like that, right? Is there a way? Well, remember that actions takes in not just the element itself, also params, right? So probably we can use that instead, and probably with that, maybe we can just need one event handler. So we're gonna do that right now. 2. I'm gonna have copy paste it over here, and I'm gonna use reference to result 2 instead. Right, so over here, I'm gonna create is called next on enter action that takes in the element and a param. So similar things, we're gonna copy one of the event handler, and we're gonna say elements that add event listener. So copy this event's name, key down, and I'm gonna call next on enter. So I'm gonna rename this to next on enter. And also I need to remember to remove event listener, because now we are adding on ourselves, then we have to do the cleanup ourselves as well. I'll say return, and then call it destroy. And I'm gonna copy this line, paste it in, except that I need to call remove instead of add. Okay, so with this, I'm gonna say okay, so now we're gonna change this, right? We can pass in as a param. What it means is that now instead of on key down, I'm gonna say use this. I'm gonna pass in as I'm gonna say over here use this. I'm gonna pass in inputs 2, right? Which means that I need to focus on input 2 on next on action. Over here, I'm gonna focus on input 3. And over here, we're gonna just not passing anything. So not passing anything meaning you have to blur yourself, right? So we can define that ourselves. So meaning this inputs is the params of that action. So which is this. So now I'm gonna say if param, then param dot focus, right? Else, okay, next. So, okay, probably a better naming would be, instead of call param, I'm going to say next element to focus. So I'm going to say here, we're going to paste it in, and then if not, there will be event.current target.blur. Right, so now I can remove all these 3 event handlers. We'll just focus on one big action that does a job. Right, so I'm going to type something, enter. Wait, not working. Event listener. Next element to focus. Wait, hold on. Okay, so next element to focus. Next on enter. Listener, destroy element, remove event listener. See. Okay, so I'm gonna try and see console log next element to focus, which is undefined. Okay. Oh, hold on. So this one is input 2. Okay. So this action is called on this inputs on the. So now we find a bug and then we can fix it, right? So which means that when you call this action, we will bind. So the action is happen when you are mounting this component, which happens when. So initially, what happens is that when we are mounting these elements, input 2, 1, 2, 3 are all undefined, right? And once we mounted everything, so this is being called on when we're mounting it, right? So this is passing in undefined over here. And then after we mounted all the 3 inputs, the bind this will update the variable input 1, 2, 3 to the reference of that element, right? But we didn't and this will be updated as well. But to get that updates, we need to call we need to add an updates method over here, which is the we'll call next element to focus, which is the next element to focus that pass in. I'm gonna say this equals to this, right? So now probably will work. So I'm gonna say enter. It will focus on next one, right? So since this action on mounts, you receive undefined because we haven't defined input 1, 2, 3. And once it's mounted, they call the action first and then it's passing undefined, right? And then the bind this will be will updates the variable 1, 2, 3 to the reference of these 3 inputs. And then because input 1, 2, 3 is changed, it will notify these 2 actions as well, telling them that since they have the update method, it will call it to tell you that, okay, what's the new reference of this parameter, right? So we have it, we update to this next element to focus. And now, so we assign it to the next element to focus. So now the next element to focus is updated with the new reference. So when we type something and click enter, it will focus and then it will blur, right? Which works as expected. So so now using an actions save us some code. Like we can reuse all the event listeners with one action, where we can have like variables pass in like parameters to the action. Well, is that like a limitation of an event handler? Well, not. It is, but not really, right? So if you look at over here, one thing we can do is that we can write, instead of having like an event handler that defines that uses a variable input 2 over here, we can write a higher order function. What that means is that we can write a function, create next on enter. So we write a function that returns us this event handler. Right? Why we want to do that is that we can create this function that returns us, and it can take in parameters. So you can take in a parameter called like input, and then we can use it over here instead. Right? So input could be again the next inputs or undefined. Right? So I'm gonna say if input, then it's inputs.focus, and else gonna be event. So this is the same thing that we have done to the actions earlier on. So event.current target.blur. Alright, so now instead we can remove all these 3 event handler. Rather, we have a function that creates a new event handler every time, and we're gonna call it over here instead. Input 1. Input 2, and this will be input 3, and this will be no inputs, right? So once again, we can try. Still works, right? So you may ask whether is it better to do it this way or using an actions, right? Well, if you ask me, I would prefer to do it using an action. And here's my reason why. Right, so if you take a look at over here, this event listener, which is this over here, when we pass in an event listener over here, is this thing is the create next on enter is a function creator that creates a new function every time when we call it. Right, so what that means is that we are creating multiple event handlers every time. Over every time when we have when the input 2 has changed, the input over here has changed, right? So the first time is that input 2 is undefined. So this will return us a new function where the input over here is referenced to undefined. And then as we mounted all the inputs where we assign the value of input 2 to like reference of the inputs to input 2, then this function will get called, like this expression will get evaluated again, which means this function will call again with a new input reference and returns us a new function, right? So every time when we change input 1, 2, or 3, we will create a new function, right? Is that costly? I'm not sure, but it's definitely something, right? So in this very simple example, probably you don't feel it, right? On the other hand, over here, results 2, when we use an action on an element, this action will be only called once when we mount the input, and then it will return us 2 methods, and then we just call that method, right? So whenever input 2 is changing to maybe pointing to different references, what it does is only call this method, which is the updates, and you will do an assignment to update that reference, right? So there's no, it does not create new functions or create anything new. Right, so that's the difference of using an action versus like maybe a higher order function creator over here instead, right? So probably in this example, the differences is negligible, and if you do it well, namely like if you make sure that you don't have any memory leaks, probably new functions you created, the old function will be memory garbage collected, and it does not feel much difference to your app anyway, right? But just for your information, that's the differences. That's the difference between using an event handler and an action, right? So we have seen 2 examples, and let's move on to the last example, which is example 3. So I'm going to change this to example 3, and at the same time this as well. So I'm just going to copy all this and create a new file called result3 and paste all of them in. And let's take a look at what we have for example 3. So in example 3 is what I call a secret input combo inputs. So what it means is that I can have so I'm listening to an on key down, and if I typed some sort of secret combo like arrow up, down, left, right, which I'm going to do now, up, down, left, right, I'll unlock a secret, right? So how it works is that I have this secret key over here. I can define it, and then on key down, I will push whatever I click on into an array called keys, and then also I make sure that if I stop typing for maybe 1 second, then I will just clear that array, right? So I need to click fast enough that in between the keys does not lasted more than 1 second, right? So at the same time, so after I clear a key, I will set a timeout so that I will clear. But at the same time, if I type another key, then I will clear that timeout, meaning which means that the timeouts will be cleared, and then it will not, this callback will not be called, it will not clear a key, and then it will register a new timeout to clear another in the next 1 second, right? So once we type in enough keys that it matches the secrets, which we will just simply do like a array.join with a comma. So all the items in the array will be joined with a comma, and if it matches the secret, then we will unlock the unlock, right? So that's how the code works, right? I think I need to do something over here, which is I need to make sure that once I set timer over here and ID equals to null, and then I'm only clearing if there's a timeout ID over here instead. Okay. So let's rewrite this. I'm not gonna explain like how you would do it otherwise, but I'm gonna show you how I would rewrite this using action, and you can judge yourself whether it's better writing using an action or writing using like event handler, like we've shown earlier, right? So first thing is we're gonna call this a secret use secret combo action. By the way, you don't have to always name your action with ending with an action. It's just to let you know that it is an action, that's all. I don't usually add that suffix of action, right? So I will call, so the action will take in an element and probably take in a params, which I would see. Let me see what I can do. So I will take in the secrets as the param, as well as maybe something like a callback function, right? So if I want to pass in a secret as well as a callback, like I want to pass in multiple things, then an easier way of doing it is to pass in as a function, as an object, so I can pass multiple things within the same object, right? So an action will only have 2 parameters. So the second parameters, if you want to pass in not just more than one thing, then probably you have to pass in as an object that collects all the things. It could be an array as well. So anything like object and an array that is like a collection of multiple things, that's all, right? So I'm going to say secrets and a callback. And over here, what I'm going to do here, secret combo action is I'm going to add event listener, add event listener, key down. Okay, and then I'm going to copy all this thing over here. Format nicely, key downs are on, key down. Right, and then I'm going to return an object where I will have update as well as the destroy. So on destroy, I need to remember most important thing of all is to remember to remove event listener if you are adding an event listener in an action, right? Remember to clean things up. You don't want, if you do not do that, it will memory leak because it will still listen. So your elements itself still listen to some event listeners and probably you couldn't, and key down is probably referenced somewhere and you just couldn't garbage collect your elements, right? So over here, let's see. So I'm gonna clear, I can remove this. So the way of using it will be, instead, I'm gonna say use. I'm gonna say use secret combo action. And I'm gonna pass in param. So I can pass in an object. So I'm gonna say, I'm gonna create an object over here. So the outer brackets is like whatever you put in a param, and then inside I want to pass in an object. So I create another curly brackets, right? So over here I have I'm gonna pass in secrets, which is a small key, lower key, pass in as a secrets, and then a callback function, which is a function. And this function will be setting the unlock to true. Right? So now let's update the code over here. So this is the secret. And this, if it matches, I'm going to call the callback. Right. And now all these things can be defined inside. So it's locked within the scope, inner scope. It's not leaked out outside. You can still define keys and timeout ID for other users, right? So now let's see what we have. Come over here, which is the results. Up, down, left, right, left, right. It's not working. Hold on, let's see. Secrets. Unlock callback. Okay, let's see what we have over here. Console log keys dot join, comma. Type in something. Up, down, left, right. Oh, okay, it works. Well, it works. So there you have it. Rewrite it using actions. Right. So we can have multiple inputs over here. We can have a different kind of secrets. Maybe over here we want to just up down 3 times. Up down. Then this one will be up down. Unlock the secret. Right. So callback. Yeah. So you have it using a secret and a callback. So here, that's all. I have for you 3 examples on how you can reuse event listeners using Svelte Actions. If you want to play around with this code, the links will be in the description. So last but not the least, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you have things to comment down below where you think that things that you can improve on, or something that I did not do correct, correct me down below or comment down below. I love to read all of your comments. And last of all, remember to subscribe to my channel, and see you. Bye bye.